Seafarers are pretty much the lifeline of global trade, but for way too long, many of them have been dealing with a hidden crisis at sea. In this explainer, we're going to dive into a massive change in maritime law, the STCW 2026 update. It's designed to protect the very people who keep our world moving. And believe it or not, it all starts with one single shocking number.
To really get why this change is so important, let's just start with this statistic. A 2025 report from the Sailors Society found that active seafarers are 2 to 10 times more likely to experience bullying than people working on land. I mean, that's not just a small difference. It tells you there's a serious, systemic problem out there.
And the data, well, it really shows you just how deep this crisis goes. Get this, 2/3 of seafarers surveyed said they'd suffered from bullying. An incredible 90% have hidden who they are for fear of discrimination. But here's the stat that really tells you about the onboard culture. Over half, 52%, spoke to absolutely no one about it. That is the culture of silence these new rules are designed to break.
Now, to understand the whole picture, you've got to look at the demographics. The maritime industry is overwhelmingly male. We're talking 88%. And that creates some really unique challenges, especially for female seafarers. In some parts of the world, they're actually twice as likely to face bullying as their male colleagues. This isn't just a number. It's a huge barrier to building a more diverse and inclusive industry.
Okay, so if you want to tackle a problem, the very first step is to clearly define it, right? Everyone has to be on the same page. And that's exactly what the International Maritime Organization, or IMO, is doing now, standardizing these definitions for the entire world.
So first up is harassment. The official definition is any unwanted conduct that violates someone's dignity or creates a hostile, intimidating environment. So think of a senior officer who's constantly mocking a cadet's accent during safety drills. That's not just a joke. It's conduct that humiliates and makes people feel unsafe.
Bullying is a little different. The key words here are repeated and unreasonable behavior. For instance, imagine a team leader who always assigns the dirtiest jobs to one specific crew member and then makes fun of them in front of everybody else. It's that pattern of behavior that's really designed to break someone down.
And then there's hazing. For a long time, this was kind of dismissed as just tradition or some kind of initiation ritual. But the IMO is now being crystal clear. Forcing new crew members to perform dangerous or humiliating tasks is not tradition. It's a form of abuse, and it completely shatters the trust you need for a crew to operate safely.
And this brings us to the biggest shift in thinking behind all these new rules. The IMO has completely reclassified this kind of misconduct. They're no longer seeing it as just an HR problem, but as a direct threat to the safety of the entire vessel.
I mean, the IMO puts it about as bluntly as you can. Harassment is now considered a navigational and safety hazard. This is really the core idea of the entire update. A crew that doesn't feel psychologically safe cannot operate a ship physically safe. The two are completely 100% linked.
So how does a toxic workplace actually lead to a shipwreck? Well, it's a direct chain of events, like dominoes falling. It starts with a toxic environment. That creates psychological unsafety, where crew members are afraid to speak up. That fear, it leads to slackness and negligence. People just stop caring. And that erodes situational awareness, that critical sense of what's happening around you. The final step? A catastrophic accident, like a collision or a grounding.
So, now that we've established the problem and how it's directly linked to safety, let's look at the solution. These new amendments to the International Convention on Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping for Seafarers, or as everyone calls it, the STCW.
The STCW has basically been the cornerstone of maritime safety since 1978. And you can see how it's evolved over the years. It started by focusing purely on technical skills, then it added security, and now, with these 2025 amendments, it's focusing on human factors like dignity and respect. It's a really huge step forward.
And the scale of this change is just stark. Before, the focus was almost all technical. Harassment wasn't even clearly defined. But now, training is being expanded to include social and psychological safety, with mandatory courses on how to prevent and respond to misconduct. It is a complete overhaul.
So what does all this mean in the real world? How do we take these rules on paper and turn them into a new reality on board a ship? Well, this next part is all about building what the IMO is calling a culture of care.
A huge piece of this is the shift from a blame culture to a just culture. Think about it. In a blame culture, mistakes get hidden because people are terrified of being punished. But in a just culture,
honest mistakes are seen as learning opportunities, and that encourages people to report things openly, which is essential, not just for their well-being, but for catching safety issues before they turn into disasters.
And for this new culture to actually work, seafarers need to have clear, safe ways to take action. The new training lays out these 5 critical steps. First, recognize what's happening. Second, speak up, but only if it's safe to do so. Third, report it immediately through the formal channels. 4, document everything. And 5, and this one is so important, support others who are being targeted.
Of course, rules are only as good as their enforcement, right? Well, these new rules have some serious teeth. Port State Control Officers, they're basically the international inspectors of the seas, will now be auditing vessels for compliance. They're going to check training records, interview the crew, and make sure these standards are being met in practice, not just on paper.
Ultimately, the goal of the STCW 2026 amendments is pretty simple, but it's also profound. It's about fundamentally changing the work environment at sea, moving away from a culture of silence where problems just get buried to a culture of care, where every single seafarer's dignity is respected and their safety is always the top priority.
So, the new standards are set, the training is going to be mandatory, and the enforcement is in place. But that leaves us with one really crucial question. Will these rules be enough to change a culture that's been decades, even centuries in the making? Or is this just the first step in a much, much longer voyage? Only time will tell.